Hi, everybody. My name is Kate Wolff, and I'm here with Blaise Preau. We're here to just quickly talk about queering the room. It's about fostering community and making impact with marketing. And Blaise, I don't think I can do a good I think I'll do you a disservice if I try to introduce you myself.
Yeah, I was like, I can talk, I can do it.
Yeah, you go
Hey,
in.
Kate. So I am Blaise Preau. I'm one of the directors of multicultural marketing at HBO, covering HBO and now HBO Max. Yeah, the multicultural team has been around in some form for about 15 years, working across LGBT audiences, African American, Latinx, Asia Pacific Islander. So yeah, we reach out to these communities and make sure we're talking to them both as people and consumers.
Yeah, well, Blaise and I have been partnering for quite some time, and I love and value our partnership. My name is Kate Wolff. I am the CEO and founder of a company called Lupine Creative, which is like a bespoke marketing agency. And then also, I am the co-chair of Do the Work. And our goal is to give queer voices a true space in the marketing and branding and make sure representation and share of voice increases over time to match our population size. So super, super excited to chat with you, especially around International Women's Day and, the importance of that. As I know for me, as a young woman and, I'm just starting my new company. It's so important to give voices to women and who are trying to make a difference. And I know, Blaise, the first thing I want to talk about is a little bit of our background because you have helped me tremendously in my career, and I'm just so incredibly appreciative of that. And, I think now about, 10 years ago when we first met and what it was like for us as young people being queer in the space, and now our current jobs. So first, can you just tell me a little bit about your role? Because I think for me, I feel like I'm almost in my dream job. So
Yeah,
what's
well,
your role?
yeah, likewise. I mean, I think, I always divide it into sort of two buckets. One is how do we market and promote programming specifically to this audience, which in my case is the LGBT audience. So any sort of shows, movies, documentaries that we have that we feel like will either feature voices within this community, so starring, written by, directed by, but also anything that we feel like might resonate with them. Maybe even like research shows us that it over indexes with a certain audience, even though it might not feature or star a queer person. And so that's sort of our programming efforts. And then separately, we have, we call our audience initiative. So you and I work very closely on human by orientation. And that is our way. I mean, I would say back in the day, but really it was like 2 years ago. There wasn't always programming. I mean, we could go an entire year where there wouldn't be a queer show. And so it was sort of like, well, the right thing to do would be to talk to this audience, regardless of if we had something to sell them, for lack of a better term. And so we developed this effort to sort of just, have an always on communication with them. And with Lupine, we've created these amazing social handles and like 1 trillion pieces of social content. I think the number is closer to like 300, but
No, 1 trillion's right.
Yeah,
No,
it's 1 trillion. Thank you. I was hoping. But yeah, so just really talking to these audiences, and I would say as a member of the queer community, this is also my dream job because I think there's, I have always had roles where like my job had nothing to do with my queerness to the extent where it was like omitted from the job. Like it was like, you're here to do this job, and let's not like bring in that other thing, that personal aspect of you. Which is tough because you don't even realize in the moment that you're sort of self-marginalizing. You're compartmentalizing that this is a part of my life that I won't bring into here. And what I've loved over the last, I'm going on 3 years here at HBO, is that my queerness is at the center of everything I do. It's what 11, 12 hours of the day are specifically about. Which is kind of amazing because then it becomes it's this thing that's not just sort of compartmentalized, but it's like, it's encompassing, my whole life and my whole self is all in the work.
I mean, isn't that incredible? I think about that all the time, especially now. It's like finally, queerness is in the zeitgeist of culture, and I could not be happier about that
Right.
because we've always been a part of culture, and steering it from the inside out. But the thing about, my personal career is the code switch and covering that I had to do at such a young age. I mean, I remember when I started in marketing, I would wear a suit to work, and I would be so uncomfortable in that suit because I was worried my queerness would like permeate the walls of the jersey cotton.
Right, right.
I wore a jersey cotton suit. It was the early 2000s. But it's
Were the sleeves cuffed? Like, were they cuffed?
Oh, they were always three quarter sleeves and like a
Because you still
flared
love a
pant.
cuffed blazer. There's still a
I
cuffed
do.
blazer in your
I almost put one on. I have about 30. I have about 30 of them. My forearms always need to be clear. Of course. But no, so I think about that all the time. And then I think about where we are in our lives and what we're actually paid to do. And I think about how often it's like, queerness is not my job. It's the environment. It's not a part of my character. It's the environment, whether or not it's like through the emails, through the conversations. I mean, when I'm setting up my house with my new wife, it's like, this is not a thing that I hide. This is a thing that I celebrate, and I make others around me celebrate.
Right.
And so I think about that a lot. Like in your life, in your career, on a personal note, have you had experiences with like queer mentorship? What's it like now? I know you work with other queer people. Like, what's the dynamic from then and now?
I will say, even to your point about code switching, then it was kind of non-existent. I will say there's not, until this job and really until HBO, which is, I thank and applaud them for, there really hasn't been that sort of mentorship or that inclusion. And in fact, it was almost like it was like a world of microaggression sort of like all the like cis straight white male bros would just sort of, talk amongst themselves. And then someone says like, oh, that's gay. And then they look over kind of worried and they're like, I don't mean it like that. And you're like, great. Yep. Whereas now, I mean, it really is, again, it's ingrained in what we do all day, but it's also working with colleagues that there's that instant sort of understanding and knowing where I don't feel like I'm going to have to, we can just talk about the work. We don't have to do expository work where I have to tell you why this is actually going to, here's why this is problematic, or here's why this, isn't going to hit the audience well or whatever. And then we'll talk about the work. There's just like an understanding of, I won't bash specific celebrities, but someone brought up a particular queer celebrity who just has a very problematic history with putting her foot in her mouth. And it was like, everyone just froze and was like, we cannot work with her. Whereas I didn't have to explain that to anyone. But yeah, so I think it's just fostering that environment where everyone, I think in any job, and especially obviously in the queer community that I'm a part of, but I can't speak as a woman, but when you bring your whole self to any job, it sounds ridiculous and it sounds like something that should be like knitted on a pillow, but when you bring your whole self to a job, it only makes everything better. And if everyone is able to bring their whole self to a job, it's having all of these perspectives and having all of these experiences that are going to make a more well-rounded finished product. So your marketing campaign or whatever it is that we're sort of trying to produce in the end is going to be that much better if everyone can bring their whole self. So if you are, a mother, so much of corporate America has told you to leave those kids at home and omit that part of yourself, but you're going to bring a perspective that I simply do not have, not having children. So I think just, again, if you can afford or create an environment where you can bring your whole self to the job, I think is the biggest thing.
100%. And I feel like we're so lucky now. And I even think even last week with Gallup's survey that just came out with the 5.6% of the US population saying they're queer. Thank you, Gen Z, by the way. And more to come, I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, that's an incredible jump from 4.2, right? From the last time they did that. That's a huge, huge influx. And it's showing that queerness and non-binary, and like where people fall on the Kinsey scale and the spectrum. It's such a beautiful thing in that acceptance. And I think you're such an interesting, you specifically, because you create visibility. Your company, HBO, creates stories that people then can see reflected. And I think you guys have been doing that better than ever. And so it must be just a dream to work on some of these shows.
It is. It is. And I'll say, as I was mentioning earlier, that was not always the case. I mean, HBO was definitely one of the forebearers of sharing stories that were sort of outside of the whatever we want to call mainstream. Definitely had queer storylines, queer characters decades ago. But it wasn't always the case that there was such a wealth of it as there is now. And I think with the addition of HBO Max, I mean, you know this, there's like 11 titles right now that we can work on that include trans storylines and non-binary storylines and queer storylines that are just, we went from like 0.5 to like 11, and the team's still the same size, but it's been an amazing problem to have, because it shows that I've always believed that HBO genuinely believed in that content and genuinely believed in sharing those stories. And then now with HBO Max, they're just able to do it on a greater scale. I just have to sort of try to keep up.
Yeah. I mean, what an amazing problem to have. And so, as we look at like our careers and where we've gone and the age, there's clearly people of a certain age that have experienced both, which is a really interesting space to be in. And we're both in that space, whereas the younger generation are coming up and it's not something that they have to code switch and cover as much. And it's celebrated out of the gate. And it's like learning how to create mentorship for those people and visibility for those people is a really interesting dynamic. And I feel like that environment is like a living, breathing organism. But what's really, really cool now is we get to make work for that community. We get to make representation, not just from the shows, but the marketing itself. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, because I think, well, I'm clearly biased, but HBO does that better than anybody. I think you guys, the nuances in the culture and showing up in the right ways. And I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of the floor to talk about some of the things you've been working on, some of the things you consider when you go into those projects, but it's about creating work for a specific audience. So can you tell me a little bit about that structure and how you create community in that space?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, as I spoke to earlier, the idea of bringing your whole self. So, anyone on the team that considers themselves a part of the community should be involved in these discussions. And especially being on the multicultural team, knowing that obviously outside of the LGBT spectrum is a racial spectrum, that, the intersectionality in the world is that like someone isn't just an LGBT person or just a Latinx person, but like there are people that are both. And so trying to staff accordingly and make sure that we're all sort of weighing in. And I would also say just trying to meet the audience where they are. We're having launched social channels just a few short months ago, but also just looking at new platforms. And, whether it's launching things on TikTok this past summer and then, talking now about what's the one where
which one? Oh, Clubhouse.
I'm like,
I was like,
gonna mime it out with my hands. I don't know how I'm gonna mime out.
You're like, it's a conference call.
Yeah. So just right now, obviously, like, I mean, frankly, everyone on our team, I'm the oldest person on our team, which is totally fine, because I think you'll have a youthful perspective who will bring in, new platforms and be able to sort of tell you where this more youthful audience is. I don't ever want to work on something where I feel like someone's like uncle who's like, hey kids, I know what's cool. Chances are I don't. So yeah, I would say, those are probably some big points. And then, what we're working on now, I mean, again, we just did a huge campaign with Lupine on It's a Sin. And we have Generation coming up actually at the end of this month. So a lot of good stuff coming.
So many queer stories to be told, right? And I think what's also great is HBO isn't the only players in the game right now in this space.
Mhm.
And I think that's also a really important point. You get, I know I just watched I Care a Lot on Netflix,
Mhm.
and they are deplorable people. It is an excellent movie. Horrible. Rosamund is it's hard to watch, but I
Yeah.
think the thing I took away as being a queer person in this community was her queerness was not a central focal point of the show. It
Right.
had nothing to do with her character development, which again was terrible. But it showed like there are crappy lesbians out there, and you know what? I'm here for that storyline because
Yeah.
I'm not here for another coming out story. I'm just interested in the story of her fraud, and her
Well,
criminality.
totally. And actually, that something that Lupine also worked with us on was The Lady in the Dale. And there is definitely a part of that storyline. For those of you unfamiliar, go ahead and watch. But Elizabeth Carmichael was basically a scam artist slash entrepreneur slash businesswoman in the 70s who also happened to be trans. Part of the story that deserves to be told is how her transness was used against her and sort of weaponized as though like if she's lying about this, then what else could she be lying about, which was a horrible way to treat a person in the 70s. But also just the idea that like anyone can be a grifter, like sort of to your point, like a scam artist can be a scam artist and it doesn't have to be that, and so that was something we were really mindful of when we were marketing the show, was that it wasn't sort of like, hey, look over here, here's a trans person. It was sort of like, here's just a really compelling, interesting story, and that person happens to have been trans.
Yeah.
But it is not, and so I think when we talk to markets and audiences, we want to be sure that we're not sort of just trying to like push a product to them because like, hey, here's a trans character, which was a real life character. Hey, look, here's a trans, person, but rather like, there's an incredibly interesting story, and you might actually come in because they're trans, but it's just an interesting story altogether.
In general, yeah, right.
Yeah,
It's not niche. It's for the mass audience. It's not specifically for the community. Just the community might evangelize it because it's one of their own. And
right.
that's a really interesting thing. And it's so nice to be here, in this time frame where that's the conversation. So this kind of brings me to like, I know that you work with queer people. It's interesting to be in a room talking about queer marketing with all queer people, which is really nice. I never thought in my life, I have always been, until recently, one or two of the queer people in the company.
Mhm.
And now I sit in a room talking about queer storylines with queer people from all different parts of the community. And I feel so blessed on that. I mean, what are I know you have a team now, so tell me a little bit about that with you and how that is, because I imagine similar to my experience, when I was young and coming up, I had no queer mentors because there was no visibility on who was queer.
Right,
So
right.
yeah, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, we're so well, and even just from like International Women's Day perspective, of the 14-person team, I was the only male, which I was totally cool with and was great. And so we've hired some people on the team. So there's two men now, but I'm always trying to. It's interesting. I think the education and the sort of mentorship is actually kind of a two-way street. I'll say the person on my team, I'm trying to always sort of again do the things that I was espousing earlier, which was sort of have everyone's voice be heard, have everyone feel like they're in a comfortable enough position to share their perspective, to share whether it's a personal story involving a piece of content, or if there's like I won't share the details, but having a relative who was non-binary and how that was kind of affecting the lens, and even just how we were speaking about it internally within the company, using certain language versus not using certain language, because we might not have anyone that's non-binary on this team, but there are people definitely within HBO and HBO marketing. So just making sure we're considering things that we ourselves wouldn't even see. And I would also say the other side of that mentoring coin is that this person is younger than me. And there, to your point earlier of like having that younger perspective of where sexuality and gender and gender identity and orientation are not as set in stone as they sort of were for you and I, where we kind of had to like make a declaration and then you were shot out of a cannon, like it was happening one way or the other. The idea that, so just having like that younger perspective, I think it's invaluable, and I thank him every day for sharing it.
Yeah, and I think it actually betters the work, and then, we talk a lot about, and I know you do this really well. It's making impact, right? But we make great marketing, but we also leave lasting roots from wherever we go. And I think HBO does that really, really well. I know in this last project that we partnered on with HBO Max for It's a Sin, we worked with an AIDS foundation, U equals U. And instead of, going heavily, because we had a smaller budget for that piece, instead of going heavily against influencers with pay, we got the right people to tell the story so it could give money directly to U equals U. And that was such a big thing. And I know you know this better than anybody, the rainbow washing that happens in June, right? So like, what are your thoughts there on like, how do you avoid the pitfalls of rainbow washing and making sure that like, you're not just making a moment, you're making something that like truly helps the community?
Well, I mean, part of what we were saying about having these dream jobs is like, hey, we get to live and work in, in who we are. But I think at the end of the day, marketing, for lack of a better phrase, is selling. You're always selling something, and you could be selling, widgets. You could be selling something that people need, or you could be like, we're selling entertainment, and we're not unaware of that. I don't. So part of what keeps it interesting and what makes us passionate about it is to make sure even just the entertainment marketing has an impact, because then at the end of the day, we have budgets at our disposal, and we can put money behind things, and we can put money behind nonprofits and donations, and we can put money behind, for It's a Sin, we created a PSA and put paid media behind it on social, speaking specifically about U equals U. And that was the most important thing to that organization, because they didn't actually need donations. They didn't actually need, it's a very small team, but what they wanted was to evangelize the message. So we were like, great, we have the cast that is appearing virtually on a panel. We'll have them stay on for 10 more minutes, and we'll have them record lines. And then we'll take our money and put paid behind it so that everyone sees that message. And it was wildly quick. I think we did it in like 36 hours. But the idea of all of these campaigns, we want them to be cool and engaging and fun and creative. And, we've won a handful of awards, even especially with you. So it's something we're proud of. But if you're not ultimately furthering a cause, you're going to find yourself feeling that there's not much point to it. Like, what is the point for me selling this thing? What is the point for me doing this thing? And oftentimes you as well in the agency, work incredibly long hours, and sometimes we travel. Back when traveling was a thing.
What was that like?
Yeah, there were ships. There was,
yeah, perfect.
but yeah, so we would travel a lot, and you can kind of get burnt out. But if you make sure that you have woven into the campaign some sort of social impact, you can be really happy about those, long hours and constant travel, because you actually do feel like you're doing something that is making the world a better place, even though we're just marketing for entertainment.
Yeah, totally. I feel that every day, that straddling the line between, making things that truly being so blessed to work in a creative industry, but also being blessed enough to work in a creative industry that talks to multicultural markets, that talks to multicultural communities, and actually has the budget and the ability to leave the footprints there, not just show up and leave, but actually create some kind of structure, give back. And so you walk away thinking, that was a cool moment that actually did something, and not just hit the KPIs, So I think that's one of the things I feel most blessed about in what we do. And especially now where there's so many eyes on it. And it's been such a pleasure talking with you about this. I mean, I know we talk all the time about this, but now we're on camera.
Yeah.
But I do really love this work, and I feel blessed to be a part of it. And And, I think about all these leaders that have got us there, and you are one of them. I like to consider myself one of them. And I think that's an important part, but there have been women that have been leading the way for years. And I always go back to like what all their inspirational quotes and things like that. And I know for this, we've been tasked with an inspirational quote. This was not a hard task for me. I will go first. I have two
Go for it.
that I think about all the time. My first one is, and I think about this actually, this is something that, like, if I could get a tattoo on my arm, this probably would be it. It's an Eleanor Roosevelt quote. And I just think, she said it so perfectly. It's nobody can make you feel inferior without your consent. And I think about that a lot. Like, as a woman struggling, like most people do in where I am in my career, with the imposter syndrome that comes along with talking, even now, talking on camera. I think about that a lot, and I say, okay, yeah, you're right. I have to be true to myself and stand. And it actually ladders really well to another quote from my mother. And I dole this one out all the time, but she told me very long ago, the only person you have to live with for the rest of your life is yourself. So you better be kind to her. And those two work really well together. One is, don't let anybody tell you you're something you're not. Right. And make sure that you're telling yourself who you are. And that is kind of, I think about those things on an everyday basis. Now I'm going to pitch to you. What do you think?
Yeah. And I will say, having the honor to work on a team that was created by women and managed to this day by women, a fearless leader is never in short supply. So my quote, I'm actually going to read it because I didn't want to get it wrong. My quote is from RBG. RIP. Women belong in all places where decisions are being made. It shouldn't be that women are the exception. And I think that could actually, apply to what we're talking about, because I also think the same thing is sort of true of the queer community. Like, they shouldn't not be included in the decision-making process and the discussion. So I wanted to give a little nod to RBG.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, she's the best. RIP RBG. Well, thank you so much, Blaise, for joining us. This has been really fun. I love chatting with you as always. I just want to give a quick, if you're interested in finding out more about Lupine or Do the Work, it's lupinecreative.com, and Do the Work, which I highly suggest everybody looks into. It's the BRG for the marketing and advertising industry for queerness, everything queer, and lots of colors at that page. It's Do the Work .com, and it's work spelled WERQ. So please check it out. If you're at all interested, reach out to us. We're a community, so we are here to connect. And then Blaise, do you want anything upcoming for you that people should be on the lookout?
Yeah, I was going to say, the initiative that you launched with us and work on all day, every day, Human by Orientation. It's where we housed our Pride efforts last year, and you can find it on Instagram at Human by Orientation, and then Twitter is human_by_o, because there's a character limitation. But it's all of our social content for the entire queer community and gender spectrum. Well,
love it. Well, thanks so much, and that's it for us. Keep looking around the village. It's amazing. So enjoy the rest of your day, y'all, and happy International Women's Day.